Hello, my name is Josh Fry. I'm going to be explaining to you guys how to remove paint from a wrapped drum. So, in my experience, I've had quite a few drums come through my hands that have been a wrapped finish, such as this WFL concert tom here, that someone did not like the finish in the past. This was originally white marine pearl, along with this Rogers floor tom here that has been silver sparkle. So what they've done, rather than buying a new drum or rewrapping it, people have either grabbed a can of spray paint or house paint or whatever they had kind of on hand and have gone through and just painted right over it. So what we're going to be demonstrating for you guys today is how to safely and properly remove the paint from these drum shells and the process that goes into buffing the wrap after that to make the drum look like what it should be looking like. So the two drums I'm demonstrating today are going to be a 13-inch WFL tom, which is white marine pearl under it, under the black paint, and a 16-inch Rogers floor tom, which is gold sparkle underneath the paint. Both drums have different types of wrap under it, so I think it's important to be able to show the differences and the different steps in between the two different types of wraps to make sure that you don't end up ruining the wrap. So before we actually get working on the drum, I want to show you guys the materials needed to do this. First off, one of the most useful tools in my opinion in the shop are these little razor blades. These are what you would find in things such as utility knives. These are very important tool in this process, at least in my method of it. So the first thing we're going to need, some paper towels is pretty much to clean up the water and any other sort of excess. Past that, we're going to be doing a lot of wet sanding in this process. So various grades of sandpaper are going to be needed along with water to go along with that. Usually for grits, I go anywhere from around 180 grit up to about 2,000, 2,500. Now, along with this, I'm also going to show you guys these two different types of wrap that are most commonly used in drum building. We have your typical kind of pearlescent finish. This is a piece of sky blue pearl. And as you can see, there's various different shades and coloring to it. And then we also have our typical sparkle wrap. This is a new piece that I got from Precision. Now, looking at a sparkle finished wrap, one of the main differences is the actual makeup of the wrap. On these wraps, it's thin top layer, which is usually colored. So if you have a wrap like blue sparkle or green sparkle, this top layer is actually going to be colored. It's not the sparkles actually underneath it that are colored. Then going into the middle here, you have these silver sparkles or glass glitter, little pieces of glass, depending on the finish. And then behind it, usually a white backing, sometimes it's black. As you can see on the sky blue pearl, with the exception of the mahogany that's still stuck to this, it would be black. Now with sky blue pearl, to my knowledge at least, there's a layer of clear on top of it too, and then the pearlescent layer in the middle. Or depending on the wrap, it might just be one solid layer where you have the black backing, and then your actual finish is built up through that. I'm not quite sure, it kind of varies depending on finishes. The process is roughly the same between the two of them. Now what you're going to do with a wrap like silver sparkle, since you only have a top layer of clear coat before you actually hit the sparkles, you got to be a lot more conservative with the method I'm about to show you, because you do run the issue of burning through this top clear coat and then hitting the sparkles and not having any clear above this. So you just got to be a lot more cautious with any sparkled finishes, because you can end up going through the wrap and ultimately ruining it. With finishes like sky blue pearl, white marine pearl, black diamond, you have a lot more of the layer that continues through the wrap, that if you end up going a little bit too far, as long as you don't hit the black backing, you still have some that you can buff out. So there's a little bit more of a buffer with kind of a white marine pearl, sky blue pearl type finish than there is with your sparkle finishes. So now that we've gone over the tools to use, I'm actually going to show you how to use these tools. So the first drum I'm going to start off with is going to be this WFL tom that's in white marine pearl. Usually what I do is I like to gauge the thickness of the paint, so I use these little razor blades, and what I'll actually end up doing is, you can do this under a lug if you're not comfortable with doing it right in the middle of the shell at first, but I'll very lightly, with the scraper, go back and forth And what this is doing is this is removing some of the clear layer that's over the top of this black finish and the black paint itself. And you can see after just a few seconds, you start to reveal some of the finish. Now there's two main paths you can go down this. You can go through the entire shell constantly doing this, and you can get this to where it's about this. Or depending on your confidence in this, you could actually keep going past this stage. So the stage will get a little bit more of a close-up with it, where you start to just barely see some of the white marine pearl. You could actually go further past it and remove this all the way down to the wrapped finish. I tend to stop when it gets to about here when you start to get some of these smaller speckles, because I run the risk of going through the wrap. And also with using these razor blades is every time you go back and every time you go forward, you're leaving a little scratch right here, whether you can see it or not. And that actually creates more work for you to buff out and sand out later on. And so usually what I like to do is get to about here and then through the wet sanding process, remove the rest of these marks. And that will just save you from any kind of headache in the future. So imagine I've done this for the whole shell. Then what I'm going to end up going, and I'm going to start today with, I believe this is 320 grit sandpaper. Just a little bit of water. Usually what I do is I just rub some of the water on it. I'm very careful not to get it in the holes there. And if I feel like I've put a little bit too much on it, I'll just wipe it off. Or if I see it getting close to that, I'll just wipe it off. But from here, you're just going to be going through and wet sanding the wrap. And as you can see just after a few seconds that those larger kind of pocks of black finish have now been removed. And then usually after 10 or 20 seconds, I like to just wipe it off, get all the dirt and gunk off of the shell. Just because if you leave that all on, it can start dripping through the shell and it's just a big nightmare. Then from there, as I lose my tool, there it is. I usually don't wet sand until after I've gone through the whole shell. Also, but I just keep continuing to go through it. And if there's ever a time where you're getting scared of using this tool and don't want to actually use this tool, you can do the same exact thing I just did with wet sanding that small amount off. You could just do that to the whole shell. The reason I don't do that is time. You're going to be sitting there for hours and hours depending on the thickness of the paint. This is, I'm pretty sure, car automotive paint that they had professionally done to these drums. And stuff like this is fairly thick. And so I know I don't want to be sitting there for hours and hours and hours scraping and sanding that off. That I will speed up the process. Even if it's a more rare finish or something, I really don't want to make sure I damage it all underneath it. I'll at least use this just to get the top layer off and speed up the process. That's why these guys are pretty handy in the shop. I get usually a large pack. This had about 50 of them in it, because after a while of sanding and scraping with these, they are going to start to go dull. So usually what I do when they start to go dull, I put them in their own pile. And when I want to, maybe when I'm getting closer to this and I want to use a more dull one to just take off a little bit, so that I'm not running the risk of really digging into it with a nice sharp blade. So it's nice to have both tools around to use them for different times in the restoration process. You can see like that started to come off. A lot of this is just practicing using the tool and understanding how it works and the different angles you can use with it. I almost never just use the tip like this, because what that's going to do is that's just going to increase the amount of small scratches that you're going to have to sand out. And some of those you might not be able to sand out without ruining the finish. So from here, you can see how this process here can take some time. So now that I've seen some of the black paint is starting to kind of pool up here, I just like to take it off and clear off the workbench in a way. And then return to go into the next spot. Flipping the shell around, however it's comfortable in your hands to be able to get to these different spots here. So I can see like this section here is a little bit more tricky to get to. Part of this is because there's a little bit of an indent from the muffler being tightened down quite a bit. But I can very lightly go and take off the bulk of this, especially around the holes here where I'm worrying about water getting through it. And I'm not pushing in deep into it. I'm kind of just letting the tool just rest right against the paint. Another major thing you can look out for is the actual flakes that are coming off the finish. So as you scrape this on paint that hasn't been, the lacquer's still on top of it, you can see that the color of these are more of a tannish color. And then once you're actually getting in the black, it kind of starts to get a little bit more tan and black. And then once you actually get in the wrap, I'll use this small piece of Sky Blue Pearl as an example. You can see as I'm going through, you can see the different colors, where the top half of this still had a lot of gook and grime and some of the yellowing actually in it. But then once I've got past that, the flakes turn into it and be a lot whiter of a color. I'll try and get a close up of that for you guys. Now the other thing this method can be used for, and there's a very strong emphasis on is removing fading out of drum shells. So a finish like this white marine pearl, where we all know it starts to actually turn a little bit yellowish, you can, to a point, through the wet sanding stages of this, starting with something like 320 or so, 200 or 220, you can actually start to take some of the yellow out of this. It all depends on how severe the yellowing has happened. Because if it's very dark yellow and you can't really see a lot of the different patterns in the finish, like for example Sky Blue Pearl, we can see all these different sort of streaks in the pattern. Once it's got so faded that you can't see that, it's pretty much a lost cause, in my opinion, to try and get it out. But if it's only just faded just a little bit, you are able to do that. It is quite a big process to be able to bring the wrap back up to the gloss that it used to be. So anyways, back to this. You can see that this is very well taking the paint off. It is a very labor-intensive thing, and I can't stress that enough, that it is going to take forever. That's just kind of the honest way about this. A lot of people say to use chemicals such as Citrus Strip and acetone and different paint strippers. I don't subscribe to that method just because how fast it can happen and how it affects different wraps differently in comparison to if I was to put some Citrus Strip, where it might have taken the paint off really fast, but the wrap didn't react to it the right way, and it actually hazes the wrap or cracks the wrap. Or there's many different ways that it can happen to the finish by using chemicals on it. This doesn't use any chemicals, where you're just using a sharpened metal blade to scrape the top of it off. And then what you're doing is you're just taking all the scratches out of it by wet sanding. So starting on a lower grit, bring it up to where you can actually start to buff the wrap, and then using some polishing compounds to be able to bring it back up to an actual kind of a glimmer. So now, since we've kind of explained this on a finish like White Marine Pearl, I'm going to switch over to the Rogers Tom. I'm going to explain that on a finish that's a sparkled finish. Now, moving on, I've put the 16x16 gold sparkle. Let's see if I can talk. Now, moving on to a sparkled finish drum, I have the 16x16 Rogers Floor Tom. I'm going to be starting off with the same method. I pretty much always start off with the razor blades as a gauge of the thickness of the paint, and then kind of can gauge what I need to do after that. So just starting with this guy, I will also take the hardware off, but just for this video demonstration, I'm going to leave it on just because I'm just going to be showing a small portion of this. And then you guys can scale it up to a larger portion on your drum, taking all the parts off and everything. So what I'm actually going to do, since I've used this on another one, I'm actually just going to go ahead and grab a fresh razor blade. It's always nice to swap them out every once in a while and just get a fresh tool under your hands. So anyways, start with this. And you can see just after a few seconds that this has already started to show. So we can see that the actual paint on this drum is probably half to a third as thin or thinner than that WFL Tom, which is actually a great thing because we're gonna have to do a lot less with this tool and a little bit more with wet sanding. But on a sparkle finish, it's actually ideal. So with this, we can see that after just a few passes here, that the finish has started to pretty much reveal itself. Now, one thing to notice with using these tools is you can see how I started in the middle here. That is leaving some scratches right at the end and here. Every time you move the tool back and forth, it's leaving a scratch. Now, since I've moved to this side to start to do another section of it, I now have scratches here, here, and here. And that's just something when you're wet sanding, you're just gonna have to take into account that there's gonna be deeper scratches in these sections here than there are in the middle here. And just to look at the drum at different angles and be able to visually see where the deeper scratches are. It is also something to know that it is a sparkle finish, so you want to make sure that you're not burning through this top layer of gold or yellow to get those scratches out. It's fine if there is a scratch and it's a drum. It's been around for 60, 70 years. It's meant to be played, but it's more important to preserve the finish in this way than it is to actually try and get out one very small scratch. So I'd rather just leave that scratch than end up burning through the finish and ruining the drum. So with that in note, just be careful, take your time with it. Now you can see that I've got a good amount of the paint off, but I haven't got all of it off. I can still see some spots where I haven't touched it at all. So I'm actually gonna go very lightly over these spots just to kind of minimize the work that my wet sanding is gonna have to do. I'm pretty much always going at the same angle. I don't really like to vary the angles at all. It's easier with this tool because it's actually only touching a very small portion of it. I like to go up and down just like that. Sometimes when I'm at the edge, I'll go a little bit to the side, but I pretty much try and keep everything in one direction. Now from that, go back to wet sanding. I've only shown you just using 320 grit right here on this drum, actually, and the other drum. I'm also going to turn it up on the side just so the water doesn't drip down completely. Let me readjust the camera. I'm going to take a second to wipe off any water that might have dripped. Just around the sides, just trying to keep everything clean. Now you can see all the gook and grime is slowly going away. You can see after a few seconds this is pretty dirty. You can even see my hands is covered with some black paint. I like to just take some paper towels or a shop rag or whatever, wipe this off. You can see that that took all the gook and everything off of it. And then also wipe my paper off in the water. Some people say to have hot water on it. It's a little bit nicer in your hands because it's actually warm. But I just grab water just straight off the tap and I just use that. As you can see, I'm going a little bit heavier in this spot to get that small section right around the edges off. And you can see once I've really focused on these sections that there's a lot more black paint going there. So I can just reuse the same towel there, wipe it off. And you can see that now our sparkled finish is back. And you can see how there's not a lot of tools that go into this method. There's not a lot of chemicals or stuff that's harsh. You can do this all in your house as long as you don't make a mess. So it's a very kind of foolproof method. at least in my opinion. The next thing I am going to show you guys is doing the same method, but just without using the razor blade. So we can see that this wrap was fairly simple to sand off. Now what I'm going to end up going through is I'm just going to pick a spot. I'm just going to start right in the middle here. And with how thin this paint is, you could see after just 10 seconds, 5 seconds, that I've already cleared up another spot. And this is just with using 320 grit. It's not a very rough grit of sandpaper. There's no really excuse to use stuff like 60 or 80 grit or 120 really on this. I tend to just start with 320. If it's taking quite a bit of time, I'll move down to maybe 220, but that's about it. Another thing to note is I don't use any sort of power sanding with this, just because this is very hands-on and you got to really keep a good eye on it. And by using a big power sander, you can't really see what's happening underneath. So anyways, these are my methods for this. The next step is actually going into buffing the wrap. So I'll show you that now. I usually use some car polishing compound, any sort of plastic, Novus. I usually use the Turtle Wax just because it's easy to find in any Ace or home improvement store. But imagine if I took this all the way up to, let's say, 2,000 or 2,500 grit with the sandpaper and it had done the whole shell. My Turtle Wax here is also a little bit dried out as I forgot to put the top back on it, but it's just kind of the idea I'm explaining to you guys. Usually what I end up doing is I take it just on a paper towel, and this is going to be already too thick of a layer that I've just put on so far, but I'll use the other side of the paper towel. I've been used to doing more of the shell than just this smaller part that I'm showing you guys today. Usually what I end up doing is I just get a light enough layer on it that I have something to start buffing. And then I have a handheld buffing machine that I go around the shell and buff the wrap up. And that will take it from it being more of a flat finish. So I'll take some of this off so you guys can see what it looks like normally prior to it being buffed. I'm just going to use a little bit of water out of this. What I have on hand. So for example, this is what it will start to look like once it's actually finished and buffed. This is just some water on the wrap right now. I'm just removing the water so you can actually get an idea of what the sheen of it should be right now. I know it's tricky with the lighting and using the GoPro here, but you can see that it's not that shiny. It's more of a matte finish. You can't see your hand in the reflection at all. So once you go through the grits, as you're going and moving up in the grits, that's actually buffing the wrap. And then once you hit it with the plastic buffing compound, that's going to go and take the wrap from it being somewhat shiny to actually shiny. Anyway, guys, thanks for sitting through my demonstration of how to remove paint from drum wrap. I hope this gave you guys some ideas on how to do this to help preserve what the drums used to be and to get them back up and running and looking how they should. So anyways, if you guys have any other further questions, drop them down in the comments, just right below here. Thanks, and have fun with your projects.